Killer as a whole is currently in one of the worst states that it has ever been in, and it's only going to continue getting worse unless multiple things in the game have a major shift. This video is meant to be more of an exhaustive explanation of all the things that I think are currently issues that the killer role deals with that go beyond just being challenging gameplay. I'm gonna do my absolute best to avoid just basically complaining. Instead, I want to explain the issues that the role has, what causes these problems, and how it could be fixed. While this isn't the absolute worst that the role has been, in my 8 years of playing the game, I've struggled to find a time where you've had to try as hard as you do right now just to keep up with survivors that you're against. To boil this down, at the very top of this video, the major issue with the killer role is that killer currently requires a massive amount of effort just to compete with survivor teams who have a decent bit of game knowledge. I'll do my best to break this down and explain so that everyone can understand why killer players are currently so frustrated with the state of Dead by Daylight and have been for quite some time now. I hate to do this, but I kinda have to, because if I don't, people are going to take this video in the completely wrong direction and the comments are going to turn into a mess of people arguing with each other and just being generally nasty. This is not at all meant to be an attack on survivor players or the game knowledge it takes to perform at the absolute highest level as a survivor. While I am a killer main, I would bet that I have more playtime on survivor than a lot of the people who are watching this video, and my experience on the role over the past year backs up everything that I'm going to present here. With all this out of the way, I want to actually get into it. The issue is that right now, there is absolutely no need to be a strong survivor player. The effort required to play the role has been gradually chipped away at for a while now because of how the game's changed over the course of the last 2 years. Right now, the survivor role is stronger than it has been in a very long time, while the experience of playing killer has taken hit after hit after hit, seemingly with more to follow if recent suggestions were to make another appearance in the future. So let's start with what caused me to make this video. A lot of other creators have brought up similar points over the past few months. However, up until recently, I was able to put up with a lot of the issues that Killer has. On one hand, the vast majority of Survivor players are just not good at the game, so while I was finding the games more frustrating, I was, and still am, winning most of my matches just by understanding DBD more than most of the teams I played against. However, the pattern of changes benefiting people who don't want to learn or, think, has made it so that I, a player with 8,000 hours, has begun to struggle against survivors who simply have strong builds to cover up for the lack of game sense that they don't have. I've always been patient with the balancing of Dead by Daylight. I do understand that sometimes mistakes happen when you buff or release certain perks, and that sometimes you do need to try and make one role or the other feel better to play. Killer players saw a successful attempt at massively improving the quality of the role in the infamous 6.1.0 patch, which buffed killers across the board, while also introducing a new meta that was so strong that it genuinely made the game miserable to play for survivors for nearly a year. Quite frankly, Killer was overbuffed in this update. Back to modern times though, the most recent update at the time of recording was the all-kill comeback paragraph, which massively updated the Trickster, introduced a new survivor.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment.
Brought in a new map, and changed a handful of perks. Off the top, the Trickster rework is something that I personally enjoy, and I do think after people have had a few months to play the character, most of the calls for a return to 4.6 will die down again. In my opinion, the issue with the Trickster has less to do with his movement speed, and instead, something else entirely. However, we're gonna come back to that one shortly. Pop Goes the Weasel got a genuinely pretty good buff, however is still a shadow of its former self, and this is where the positives end for this update. Lee Yun-jin's perks, Self-Preservation and FastTrack, were taken from the absolute bottom of the barrel to now being two of the better options for survivors in the entire game. Let's begin with Self-Preservation, because I think the issues with it are less systemic and more of a genuine mistake that was made. Since the perk is newly changed and some of you almost certainly haven't used it because of the reputation it's had over the years, what the new Self-Preservation does is give a survivor 30 seconds of the elusive status effect every time the killer hooks someone. Elusive allows for a survivor to hide their scratch marks, pools of blood, and grunts of pain. This was designed to be an anti-tunnel mechanic to help stop killers from targeting the same person over and over. This perk just, quite frankly, is not that. Recently, Elusive has been finding its way onto other perks, and I think it's genuinely incredibly risky to be making this mistake. Not only for the gameplay of killers, but also the health of the game overall. Something that most of you probably have realized is that this hard counters any perk that reveals survivors' auras for the next 30 seconds after you make a hook. This includes Friends Till the End, Barbecue and Chili, and Grim Embrace to a lesser extent. These 3 perks are all incredibly healthy and encourage killers to not simply proxy camp a survivor by showing you exactly where you should go next. Now, if a survivor has this one single perk, it denies the killer information. Does this remind you of any other perk that desperately needed to be nerfed for doing this exact same thing? Distortion was nerfed to its current state in patch 8.3.0 to stop it from allowing survivors to completely rat and counter a vast majority of killer information perks and add-ons. Self-preservation does what is essentially the exact same thing that Distortion did without having a limit due to not having a stacking system, and also hiding your blood and grunts of pain at the same time. In all honesty, Elusive is something that should have remained as an anti-tunnel mechanic instead of just being thrown onto perks that don't require you to have at the very least been hooked. My suggestion for self-preservation is keeping the effect, but requiring the person using the perk to be on their final hook stage. It works in concept, makes sense with the name of the perk, works with the status effect, and would be much more balanced than it currently is. Moving on to perhaps the most controversial perk in Dead by Daylight right now, and that is the reworked version of FastTrack, which, funnily enough, works extremely well with self-preservation. I'm sure you already know what FastTrack does after all the discussion around it, but it now acts as a mini, multiple time used brand new part effect that can be comboed with said add-on. Every hook the killer makes will give the survivor 3 stacks. Each stack is worth 2% permanent progress, meaning that every hook on a teammate will remove 6% total progress from the generator you're working on if you can hit the great skill check. You can hold up to 9 tokens at once, but it's worth noting that using the tokens before you reach 9 will allow you to keep gaining them until either all of the generators are complete or your teammates have been sacrificed. I'm gonna keep things pretty short here because so many other people have already spoken about FastTrack in the short amount of time that it's been in the spotlight. I don't really know or understand why there have been so many attempts to nerf killer regression perks while Hyperfocus, Stakeout, Deja Vu, brand new parts, and now FastTrack are causing generators to be finished at genuinely egregious times. However, the speed is only the second biggest issue with FastTrack. Much like self-preservation, this perk actively punishes the killer for not tunneling or slugging. The more you spread hooks, the more uses of FastTrack a survivor will get. It's a completely backwards design for what the game should be trying to encourage the killer to do. All of this has gradually made it harder and harder as a killer player to use any kind of perks outside of the weakened generator slowdown perks that are currently able to be used still. It has been a long time since I felt like I have had to run the strongest perks in the game as a killer more than I do right now, which is a game-wide perk design issue for the survivor role. Quite literally everything about Survivor is faster than it should be right now. Healing, for example, is ludicrously fast because of botany knowledge, resurgence, circle of healing, will make it, solidarity, empathic connection, do no harm, and even more that aren't on quite this level of strength. The issue isn't any single one of these perks, it's when you stack one or more of them and you'll have resetting speeds that are comically fast. Moving on, Exhaustion has remained untouched for years and years. These perks, but especially Lithe and Sprint Burst, have become 2 of the most dominant with such a low amount of effort required that Dead by Daylight has ever seen. Say what you will about Dead Hard and Balanced Landing, but those perks at the very least have an activation condition instead of just playing the game as you should from the very start and being rewarded with it. While Exhaustion by itself is incredibly strong, the effect goes from strong to genuinely ludicrous with the use of Vigil. I've talked about Vigil multiple times on this channel, so I don't really want to go into it again. I'll just say that it is incredibly silly that there's a perk that will shut down a multitude of killer perks, powers, and add-ons while also buffing the strongest status effect in the game for survivors. I didn't really have a large section to fit this into, but Shoulder the Burden fundamentally breaks Dead by Daylight. It has such a massive upside with an extremely small downside that, of course, will be negated without a single issue by Vigil. This has been one of the most unnecessary buffs in Dead by Daylight history, and to this day, I don't understand why it was changed in patch 8.5.0. My favorite killers in the game are all mid to low tier, however my absolute favorite is the Nightmare, who is especially, unfairly might I add, countered by Vigil. I know firsthand just how silly this perk is right now, and honestly, that's all I'm going to speak on when it comes to it. I've covered it in my Exhaustion video, and a video I made a few months back covering Vigil exclusively. Extremely silly perk. This one's pretty easy to fix, simply making proper adjustments to some of the strongest perks that survivors have. A lot of people convince themselves that there aren't a lot of strong options in the game right now for the role, but it's just not true. Survivor has a multitude of strong perks. Unfortunately, they're being outshined by the same 16 perks that people have been using for years now. On the killer side of the game, behavior has done fairly well to shift more and more perks into play. It genuinely baffles me that we're entering the 10th year of Dead by Daylight and Sprint Burst has been arguably the very best perk perk in the game since day one. Hyper Focus, the just mentioned Sprint Burst, and Deliverance have literally never been nerfed despite being 3 of the absolute best Survivor perks in the game. Unbreakable just got its first proper nerf in years, Windows of Opportunity has been removing any need of game sense since 2022, and so many more. I'm not against survivors having strong perks, I'm against survivors having strong perks that have not shifted at all for years at a time. It makes playing not only killer, but survivor as well incredibly frustrating and, worst of all, predictable. There are very few things that feel worse in this game than losing a match because you didn't bring the best perks and the other side did. And this is where I want to circle back around to the major issue with not only the Trickster, but the majority of the killers in the game right now, and that is going to be represented by the newest map, the Trickster's Delusion. While this map isn't the only example of this problem, it's the newest one in a growing list of aggressively unbalanced maps. Instead of tiptoeing around this, Trickster's Delusion has some of the absolute worst gameplay in the entire game. Don't get me wrong, it's very pretty, arguably the best looking map in the game, I would probably say it is, but there's a handful of god pallet spawns, some absolutely ridiculous god windows, the map is extremely claustrophobic, everything looks the same so it's difficult to know where you are at times, and the most frustrating part of the entire map is that survivors are able to pre-run most of the killers in the game extremely easily. I will say, it's nice to have another map where stealth killers can work exceptionally well, but that comes at the expense of a lot of the other characters in the game. For example, pre-dropping has become so common for survivors as well that actually getting into a proper chase has become so difficult, which I can't even necessarily blame survivors for because of how weak these filler pallets are. It's an almost necessary evil at this point. However, it undeniably made the killer experience much worse because of the complete denial of interactivity. Other than the strength of pre-running on the map, there's also a ridiculous amount of random junk that's meant to serve as a line of sight blockers on this map and many others that make Trickster feel much worse than he probably actually is. This also goes for other ranged killers. Cards on the table, I think this is the hardest issue to fix for killer players. A lot of this has become so ingrained in Dead by Daylight that it would take months and months of going through the majority of these to slowly correct the absolutely absurd maps that can be played right now. I don't necessarily mind some maps being in favor of survivors, in fact I kind of support that, but there is a major imbalance in the strength of a lot of the maps in Dead by Daylight right now, and they continue to get more and more difficult to play on with each and every update that is meant to change up the maps and tiles that spawn in them. This was made especially prevalent with the pallet density changes that have since mostly been reverted. So with all of this and more that I'm sure you can think of, why do so many people not see the incredibly difficult spot that Killer is in right now? If you look at the comments of this video, I'm absolutely sure that you'll see these people who think I'm coping or bad at the game or whatever. Well, there's two massive reasons in my opinion, and I want to quickly cover those, because in a way, Killer is actually quite good. I know I'm about to lose some people here because I'm deciding to give the Survivor players some slack, but for those of you who haven't clicked off, please let me explain. I promise I'm not just immediately backpedaling on the entire video. So nearly all these issues I discussed are severely less impactful if you play the strongest killers in the game right now. This is because these select few killers are able to almost completely negate a lot of the things that survivors can do right now without much pushback. It's almost an undeniable fact that killers like the Blight and the Spirit, for example, will absolutely obliterate the vast majority of survivor teams they play against in public matches if the killer player is relatively experienced with the character they chose to play. Dead by Daylight is in such a weird spot right now where the higher tier characters are so dominant that Survivor can feel horrible to play a lot of the time because so many people are just playing these strong characters. And the reason why so many people are playing the stronger characters is because Survivor as a role is so incredibly overtuned that it makes it very difficult to play weaker characters. It's genuinely so funny to me to think about. One of the game's biggest balancing issues has been caused by itself. It's so strange and backwards, but it feels like Dead by Daylight is being balanced around these S tier killers and another type of player that we'll discuss in just a moment, while the rest of the cast of killers just sinks further and further underwater because of the steps being taken to try and help survivors play against these overtuned killers. Let's take the pallet density changes for example. For someone like Blight or Dracula, this didn't really mean much. It did make them a bit more manageable for survivors, but these characters have abilities to immediately catch back up or hit over pallets in the example of Dracula. Because of this, it made sense to add so many more pallets for survivors to play around. However, for a killer like the Demogorgon or the Cannibal, you've gone from struggling a bit to having been in the weeds. This made these killers incredibly painful to play. Quite frankly, a handful of the killers who are too strong right now just need to be nerfed for the health of the game. I mean, you know, the usual suspect, but the main one that has become public enemy number 1 is the Blight. He just is way too strong and genuinely has prevented the rest of the role from really being fixed, because any generalized buff you make to killer will also directly buff Blight. In all honesty, I don't think he needs any major nerfs. Common community suggestions like moving him down to 4.4 and applying a cooldown after he breaks a pallet would be a fantastic place to start. Once Blight has been put more in line, you can begin gradually picking away at the perks survivors needed to compete with him so that other killers who are weaker than Blight don't have to deal with him. Moving past the discussion of overtuned killers, the next one is something relatively minor in all honesty. What I think the major issue with Survivor is something I mentioned briefly earlier, and that is a simple lack of understanding of the game. There's a reason why solo queue is considered so bad, and it's not because of a lack of communication, it's because the majority of people who play Dead by Daylight don't understand the game at all. Sonico being a consistently high kill rate killer every time stats are revealed is an extremely alarming sight, considering that she is undeniably one of the absolute worst nothing burger killers in the entire game, and that's coming from someone who really likes Sonico. Despite all of the information given on the HUD, you'll still have people going to the second stage because of the lack of game sense that the common Dead by Daylight Survivor player has. I'm really not sure just how much longer DBD can continue catering to people who don't have any intention of improving at the game. In a world where behavior has officially endorsed the competitive scene in their game, I don't know why the game hasn't taken a more competitive stance. This game needs tutorials to teach people how to play it properly. This game needs to tell people how killers work and what you do against them, so Sonico isn't, on paper, one of the best killers in the game. It's like we can't decide if DBD is meant to be something that is genuinely worthy of the great competitive scene that the community has built, or not. One role feels like it's slowly being balanced for that, while the other role is being balanced for the guy who wants to get off work and have God mode for 2 hours a night. If you want to play anything except top tier killers, currently in Dead by Daylight, you are setting yourself up to be frustrated with the perks and maps that are in the game right now. I've been a killer main for 8 years. I played through some of the worst meta for killers that we've ever seen. Original Medal of Ban, Made for This, FTP Buckle Up, Circle of Healing, DS Unbreakable, Original Dead Hard, and so many more. But this past year, especially after this last update, has made me dislike playing killer now more than I have ever before. I don't get to enjoy the game anymore because the way I like to play, which is spreading hooks, is now being actively discouraged by things like FastTrack and self-preservation. The only way to stay in the game right now is, unfortunately, hardcore tunneling with 4 meta perks, and a lot of the killers I enjoy playing are now, more than ever, being made weaker and weaker with every single patch introduced. Dead by Daylight needs a serious change to the way things have been going. The top tier killers are way too strong to the point where it makes the killer role look much stronger than it actually is, and because of that, everyone beneath these overtuned killers are rotting in a meta that has only gotten worse and worse for the enjoyment of playing 90% of the killers in the game right now. In a game that has so many frustrating elements already, from the hostility within the community to the absolutely absurd bugs that will remain in the game for months to years at a time, the balancing shouldn't be focused around 5 killers who are too good. I couldn't imagine how this game feels to play for someone who strictly plays Trapper, Ghostface, Legion, or a few others. It shouldn't really be that much of a shock that you're seeing Blight and Kaneki every other match anymore, because those are 2 of the very few that can keep up with good Survivor teams. Anyways, that's going to be the end of this one. If you would like to support me, leaving this video a like would be a great way. If you want to catch my next DVD video, subscribing will alert you when the next one is posted. My community Discord server, Twitch, and second channels are both linked in the description. My name is Kasir, and I hope I'll see you guys next time. Tally ho, everyone.